Mic on before I jump onto a YouTube live. It's the way it is. Anyway, we're going to record another podcast live today. I'm going to get my keyboard out of the way. Do you know when I lean on my keyboard like this, it stops the recording of my podcast? This leads to bummer. Anyway, I'm just going to jump right in here and talk about the power and danger of silence. I'm going to cough first, though. For those of you watching on YouTube, if I make a mistake, I do just stop the recording and then I go back and I edit, and it's all part of the fun. So we're going to jump into this thing today. I'm going to hit record. Welcome, everyone, to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you want to live on your terms so that you can learn how to create a world where you are not feeling like you're living the life that somebody else designed for you. It's much better if you design your own life. Today is Monday, May 18, 2020. This is episode 308 of Living Free in Tennessee. And today I got to thinking, because we talked about a little bit on Friday about tattling, which is speaking up. I got to thinking over the weekend about the power of silence. And then I started thinking, well, it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. Silence can be a very bad thing. And I think right now we're seeing some examples in the world of forced silencing of people who are asking legitimate questions and questions they should be asking. And that's dangerous. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of silence and how to use them and whether they're good or bad later in this show. Before I do that, I want to remind you the Holler Neighbor live stream will not be this week. We're going to go to every other week. So next Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. Also next Thursday, you're getting a twofer, which is May 28th. We are doing this awesome webinar with Joshua Sloan of Sloan Tech. He's also the man behind Get a Host Now, the host I keep recommending for people when they ask me if they should go to HostGator and I scream and yell, no! Yeah, you really don't want to go to HostGator. Anyway, he's going to come on and talk to us about using Google My Business to dial in some of your SEO, especially location-based searches, which is really powerful. So if you've got a business and you haven't set up Google My Business, or you have already, join us for that webinar. It's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. Just go there on the right-hand side. At this very moment, as of the recording of this podcast, we have the last webinars linked there. Right as soon as I'm done recording this, though, I'm switching it out so you can sign up for that webinar. Of course, the premium members will have a link for you on the back end in the membership portal. And then the basic membership, there's a coupon code for you to use that you get to use 2 to 3 times a year. Probably just going to make it 3. We'll just call it 3 now. 3 times a year to see webinars for free if you're already a member. All of that's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. And I got to be honest, guys, this spring workshop of mine that was supposed to happen last month, it's coming fast. So we are going to end up taking a podcast break the week of the workshop. I'll hopefully be back into the saddle the Monday afterwards. Just giving you a heads up, though, we'll be doing replays for the week during and before the workshop. It starts on a Thursday, but I'm going to be working my tail off all week long on that. And that is the week of June 9th. The workshop itself is 11 through 13. With that, it's time for our usual segments. First up, I have Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you eat and eating what you store. And a lot of what I have focused on this year has been surrounding organizing, because, pantry management is a skill you develop over time unless you're taught from a very young age. And I didn't really grow up learning pantry management. I learned some because my mom coordinated her bulk foods, and then you had to take them from the big canister to the little canister, and we had canned food in the basement, and we had things in the freezer, and mom's really good at organizing. And I never realized until I was an adult doing it on my own that I lacked some skill, one of which was to remember to use that ancient can of sauerkraut. Why you would buy a can of sauerkraut, I don't even know now that I know how to make sauerkraut, but I used to buy it. And, you know, and then I wouldn't eat it. So over the years, I've developed systems. And this year, with the pandemic hitting and people having shortages, it just seemed like a good time to talk about easy systems you can put into place to manage your pantry so that it's not a big hairy mess every time you have to get into it. And I've also been completely redoing where I store things here this year as part of an overall home happiness improvement project for myself. So that being said, it is time for canning season to start. We're not quite there. I haven't actually found anything to can yet, but I saw that mulberries were coming off Kurt's tree up in I think he's out in West Tennessee. And I thought, wow, mine aren't. I mean, like, I don't even think I have berries on my tree. I need to go look because we had a freeze a couple weeks ago. But I also saw that the raspberries and blackberries are blooming and starting to set fruit. My strawberries have set fruit. This is super exciting because I just planted those a couple weeks ago in the outdoor hydroponic system. What that means is we're going to start getting dribs and drabs of fresh fruit and vegetable off of what we're growing here on the homestead and at the farmers market if and when they open, which they have not opened to my knowledge, but the farmers are starting to sell produce now and again. We'll start getting dribs and drabs of, first we get salads and greens, and then, squash comes on. Next thing you know, you see a cucumber or two, and then it's tomato season, green bean season, peas. Peas come before all of that. And then this miraculous day happens where you have way too much of something. And I'll share what's going on this season as that happens. And I'll also share with you how I deal with small amounts of extra fruit and vegetables that are not quite enough to pull out the canner, but you don't want to waste it. Yeah, I usually have a strategy for keeping those folded into the food plan here. In order to get ready for canning, though, it is time for me to do the big old shift in the kitchen. And because we removed the wall from the living room to my kitchen, I also just had like about 4 boxes of stuff where I don't know where to put it away. Yeah, it's kind of a problem right now. And I was supposed to deal with that on Saturday. And instead, I went to the store and I went shopping and I went to 4 stores. And it was like, so I haven't been shopping really since March. And I don't know if I just forgot how terrible it is to go to the store or if it's just more terrible to go to the store now. I came back from that trip and it took like 4 hours with all of the whole thing and, unpacked. And I have a process for how things come into the house right now, pretty careful. And I sat on my chair and I grabbed a novel and I read, and then I fell asleep. So I did not get the goal for Saturday. So now that goal has to fold back into this week, but I'm reorganizing everything so that there is a place dedicated in my kitchen for canning equipment. And this is like a big canner, a collection of jars, a collection of lids. The canning paraphernalia is always put away in the same place, a place where I can put canned goods to dry not to dry, to cool, so that I don't have to run around with my cutting board so they don't burn my formica. So I have a stainless steel little work bar, and I like to cool my jars on that because I don't have to put anything under them. It's just ready to go. Metal can handle the heat. And what usually ends up happening, I will confess, is I end up with this tower of boxes of jars, and kind of tossing around next to it, I have the big old canner, and then I have the water bath canner, and then my carry canner is usually on a shelf somewhere, which is the electric canner. Well, I don't want to deal with that. And then I'm like doing this dance, this little boogie scoot dance around my canning stuff while I'm canning. Nah, not this year. So I'm redoing the kitchen to organize that. And at the same time, I'm auditing my canned goods, which I do a couple times a year now, the home canned stuff, to make sure that we're eating the oldest jar of beets that are pickled or whatever first, and then opening up the space where I start loading. Because when I can, I load I have a big shelf that goes the length of my house near the ceiling. I load from my bedroom all the way across the living room, across the kitchen, before I go into the mudroom, because that's the coolest part of the house. Well, at this time of year, I move whatever's left there into the mudroom, and I'm using from the mudroom as fast as I can. because it's warmer in there, and it's better to store your canned goods in a cool, dark, dry, safe location. So that's how I do it. And it's time to just move everything, take an assessment of what I have, prioritize using up some of the things. Like because I went keto this year, the corn isn't being used as much as it usually would because I'm not folding it into meals. She pauses the podcast recording and scratches her nose. It's like it never fails. I don't touch my face much, but man, I start recording and I'm on video and the nose itches like right here. It's like this hair coming from up on my forehead, totally distracting when I'm talking about canned good. Okay, I'm going to go back into the I didn't even get any chuckles from the peanut gallery. Come on, guys. This is funny stuff. Work with me here. Anyway, okay. So this year I will succeed on the canning organization project. Okay, I got an LOL. Thank you, Josh. Thank you. I knew there was a reason I liked you. And then I am putting up about 6 trays of dried tea herbs or herbal things every week. What I used to do in the past was it would be time to get all of the stinging nettle and I would dry all of the stinging nettle. And it would be time to dehydrate the rose petals and I would dehydrate all of the rose petals. What I've been doing this time, because some of these things you have to do them all at once. Like rose petals are about to be done. The wild roses are about to be done for the year. In fact, this rainstorm we're getting right now may take out the rest of them before I can go harvest more. But things that are kind of all like red clover, mullein, dandelion flowers, those sorts of things, I'm doing about 1 tray in my dehydrator per week. So I'll just, on my morning walk, I'll collect them and I'll put them each on their own tray. And I do about 6 trays total because I leave a tray's width in between them. I don't even turn the dehydrator on. I'm just letting them go at air temperature. We're about past that time now because the humidity in my house is starting to ramp up. But I dehydrate them. I store them in jars with moisture eaters in jars. I have a vacuum packer lid attachment so I can suck as much air out of that as possible. And this is working way better for me than the big scale herb collecting and drying I have done in the past, where I'm kind of filling the jar a little bit at a time. It's kind of working as part of my recreation. And we'll see how it goes. I do really prefer on the herbs and the teas, if I can, to dry them without having to run the dehydrator, which adds heat, which then impacts, especially on those like really fragile rose petals. Just imagine what that's like. It impacts the flavor, and I think it impacts the medicinal qualities. With that, it's time for our next segment, and that is featured forage. Guess what today's topic is? It's rose petals. Oh, how did I even do that? It's kind of funny. I didn't know I was going to talk to you guys about rose petals in that segment before, but hey, we're straight into the featured forage. So I had a breakthrough discovery because of Angie's Gardens. They have a tea called Sweet Delilah Rose, and it's got like a chocolatey thing going on. It's got rose petals. It's got mint, and it's tasty, and it makes me happy. And I think it might be one of my favorite teas that they make. And it was one that I got as a tea of the month, as part of their tea of the month club. And I became aware that you can make tea with rose petals at that moment. Now, if I would have thought about it, I would have realized it because you can eat them on salads, you can candy them and put them on desserts. Like they're edible. Why not put them in tea when they're dehydrated, right? So then I got to thinking, well, what about the medicinal effects? Because I knew that rose hips are high in vitamin C, and probably by extension, the rose petals would be high in vitamin C. And so if you live somewhere like where I do, where citrus fruit does not grow, and you're actually living off food locally, one of the things you need to think about is your vitamin and nutrition balance. If you don't have supplemental vitamins to take, you need to get it from your food. One of the things that happens if you don't get enough vitamin C is scurvy. In fact, we have a really unpalatable dry lime here that grows that a local doctor, I can't remember his name, cultivated a lime variety that would grow here to fight scurvy, which I thought was kind of cool. I've been trying to get my hands on some of these trees. They're very terrible trees that are very thorny and the fruit's not very good, but I just kind of like to preserve some older varieties of things. So I'm trying to get my hands on one and put it way far away where I don't need to mow and pop my mow tires, right? Or my tires of the mower. So anyway, so I started looking into rose, like the medicinal impacts of rose. And I looked specifically at the wild rose because right now out in Tennessee and further north, this will happen. There's these vining roses that they just kind of grow and they'll take over just kind of like kudzu and they'll drape over everything. And the flowers are like an inch in diameter. They're tiny little flowers. In fact, I mistook them for raspberry flowers for like the last 5 years because I never looked really close. And they bloom at about the same time our wild raspberries bloom. And then I looked at the leaf shape and I said, well, that's not a raspberry. And I realized I went up and smelled it. Why, that's a rose. I love roses. One of my favorite flowers is the rose. And so the medicinal properties I am sharing with you right now are from the wild rose. I imagine that cultivated roses have similar properties. I didn't look for the medicinal side of roses that are not this variety. And I know that sometimes plant variety makes a difference, but somebody else summed it up way better than I did. I put a link in the show notes to more reading on the herbal impact of wild roses. But here's what we have for the body. In herbal medicine, we use the petals and fruit, rose hips of the rose. Rose petals are mildly sedative, antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, and anti-parasitic. So, in other words, I should be shoving this down my goat's face, right? They're also mild laxatives, a good support tonic for the heart, and great for lowering cholesterol. The antiseptic nature of the rose petals makes them a wonderful treatment for wounds, bruises, rashes, and incisions. Taken internally, their anti-inflammatory properties make them a wonderful treatment for sore throats or ulcers. They can stimulate the liver and increase appetite and circulation. The mic has a weird fuzzy sound like it's shorting out. Okay. Stand by. Is that a little bit better? I'm probably talking too loud and making my microphone clip. Is that better? Is it better? Is it better? Is it better? Just trying to deal. And also my mic is rocking today for some reason. Did I fix the problem? The popping is my fault. Sorry about the peas. Okay, I just turned the gain down. Where was I? Have to go back and listen. Something about antispasmodic. Hey, it increases appetite and circulation, just for the record. Okay, thanks for letting me know, guys, because that just made the podcast not be annoyingly buzzy the whole time. I must have accidentally hit the gain when I was redoing stuff on my desk and moving stuff around. It's still bad for hat. Is everybody else hearing buzz? Is it when I'm really close? Okay. I think it was the angle of my mouth. If Hold on. This is where we save the file. Okay, guys, let me know if it goes funky again, because I have had this mic has had to be back for repairs once already, and there's a heat sensitive thingy like transformer in there that if it's gone bad again, I need to make them fix it. The good news is they fix it for free for like 10 years. So it could be GarageBand causing it. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go on. So then the article goes on to say, got the flu? Rose can also lower your body temperature and help bring down a fever or cool you off in the summer. As an antispasmodic, it helps relieve spasms in the Respiratory system, asthma and coughs. I find things for asthma all the time. That's really interesting. In the intestinal tract, cramping and constipation, and in the muscles, cramps and sporting injuries. Adding its antiviral qualities, you've got an entire winter's medicine chest in one herb. This gives me motivation to go harvest more rose petals if this rainstorm doesn't harvest them for me. Okay, so what I knew about roses was the vitamin C thing and skin toner. So because of its antiseptic properties, you make they in the old days, and you can still do this today, you make rose water and use it on your face to keep the blemishes down, also known as zits. And it has healing properties, so it can help, ladies with some of those wrinkles we're not quite ready for yet. But as I got to reading about it, I also found out you can use it to help ease the pain of a sunburn. It's not going to cure it, it eases the pain. And the antiseptic will kill any, bacteria that's irritating your skin when your skin's sensitive, right? And it will also because it has a cooling property, helps cool it. So then I'm like, "Well, how in the world do you make rose water?" Right? Because I know that it can be done, and if a friend of mine said in passing yesterday, "Hey, oh, yeah, rose hips are the best way to make rose water." So then I looked it up, and I found 2 methods. One, you take the rose petals and you heat them in water, um, with a bowl with ice in the middle and the lid on, so you're in essence, you're distilling the essence of the water into that bowl, okay? Which is interesting, like, anyway, I and that sounds hard. Or you take the rose hips and you crush them up and you cover them with already heated water and let that steep for 2 hours and then strain it through cheesecloth. I would be more likely to do the second, especially since I had a still, and so I could have done an actual distillation, but I got rid of it, so don't have that anymore. But I think I will make some rose water when rose hip season comes. Of course, right now we're getting the wild rose petals. I'm going to be marking some of these areas where they are so I don't mistake it for another plant later. And I'm going to look for the rose hips this year because the wild roses should put on hips. I also have Rosa rugosa planted on my hillside. This is its second year. I have one plant doing really well. My other plant of Rosa rugosa looks like it might die. We'll see what happens. I think the goat got in and took a bite out of it too. And that's, of course, it's the one that's half dead anyway. But that plant is known for putting on rose hips very aggressively too. Not all domesticated roses will put on a rose hip, but it's like a fruit that comes after the rose blooms. So if you're deadheading your roses, you're cutting off the rose hips before they're made. But again, many of the pretty garden varieties don't actually make rose hips anyway. But part of why I put Rosa rugosa in was because I wanted rose hips on my property for the vitamin C, because I'm trying to have vast number of vitamins that are covered, as well as medicinal uses. And then Nicole likes roses. So if you pair Rosa rugosa with other, fun tea roses or whatever, which I've done now. I have one, oh, I'm really excited. It's Winter Flame or something. I guess something like that. Anyway, it's a white rose with red little tip, like on the very outer part of the tip. Very excited about that one. Um, anyway, it having Rosa rugosa nearby helps keep some of the common rose diseases from hitting them. And so I thought, well, we'll pair all of those things together and perhaps I won't have to be fighting the fungus because in Portland, Oregon, I fought the fungus. And then some other ways to use rose hips. You can use them, you can make rose hip jam or jelly. There are recipes for chutney, muffins, and fruit leather. Have I tried any of these? Negative. But if I get rose hips this year, I will try it and I will let you know what I think of all of these possible uses of rose hips. I'm kind of excited about this one this year. This year was the year of the rose for me, and I decided I was gonna increase the number of roses on my property because I only had 1, and I had it from a cutting I took off a neighbor's rose last year, and I had planted a flower for myself last year that died, a rose, and so this year, I was like, "This is the year of the rose. I'm gonna make sure the Rosa rugosa survives. I'm gonna add a number of roses to my hillside because I just plain like them." And I don't know why I lived here 14 years without my favorite flower growing on my property, but I'm over it. And so it's the year of the rose. And at the same time, I decided I need to learn more medicinally what it'll do, as well as some ways to eat it. right? Because I know you can put the rose petals on a salad as long as you're not growing it with a bunch of crazy antifungal, disgusting chemical stuff. And you can also, um, you know, use it in your tea, which I discovered from Angie's Garden. So, guys, that is the full breadth of my knowledge of using roses and rose hips. How do you guys use them? If you have experience with this, I would love it if you would share it with me by leaving a comment on the blog or just interacting on social, or send me an email, nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, because this is the year of the rose for me. Okay, next up, I have a Stump the Sauce from Krystal in Michigan. And she wrote this right after I talked about red clover on the podcast. And she said, "Do you know if there are any herbal uses of scarlet clover? I've looked online and I can't find it." And I am by no means an herbal expert. For those of you listening who are, I would love it if you pipe in on this, but I did the same thing. I looked at all of the herbal resources and I found zero medicinal studies or uses for scarlet clover. Scarlet clover is a very red clover, right? So the red clover looks purple to me. Scarlet clover is a much deeper red, beautiful looking plant, great for ground cover. Adds, I believe it adds nitrogen back into the soil if you're tilling it back in, like clover does. Bees love it, but it does not appear to have the same medicinal uses as the red clover, which is kind of helping with mood enhancement, and it's really tasty in tea, by the way. Um, helping with menopausal issues, those sorts of things. So, Krystal, I don't think it does have the same sorts of thing. If you're growing scarlet clover, you might consider sprinkling in some seeds from red clover as well. If you're looking for that medicinal payoff, they'd look great together. They would look really good together. With that, it's time for our next segment. That's Operation Independence. This is where I talk about building ongoing local sustainable income into my life and paying off my debt. Paying off my debt. I am proud to say I have made it through the great not making any money month of April that many of us had, and didn't incur more debt. That's like my one achievement. In fact, what happened as things happened and the shutdown started, I had total tank out on one kind of business, um, which is the marketing consulting. I had, some things ongoing, but like the usual ongoing volume gone. And for about 2 days, there were no coffee sales, and then I had the stock up orders. So for all of you who stocked up because you knew you were gonna be home for April and you ordered from me, thank you, that really helped. In April, though, it kinda slammed back down on the coffee side, and there weren't a lot of opportunities coming my way, which is interesting. And then now that May has started, I'm starting to see opportunities again. I'm hoping, I'm just telling you my personal finance story right now. Um, I'm hoping this will mean good things for the rest of the year, but I also know that people's budgets are really, really strapped. So, um, from an Operation Independence standpoint, I'm really glad I managed to weather what is a minor disruption in income. Relatively speaking, like a lot of people lose jobs for 6 to 9 months and can't find a new one. And that, like, I can't, that would be a lot harder for me to weather right now, even though I've been building more stability in. But I and my businesses managed to weather the 4-week starvation period that was April of 2020. And that just means that this ongoing attention to saving and debt payoff and building new disciplines and building new revenue streams and having multiple revenue streams has been the right strategy to weather the weird thing that happened this year. So we're gonna keep doing that here. I mean, like, I'm going to keep doing that because I know it's the right path, and I know that if I would have had a job, unless I was a public school teacher, I probably would have been out of income for much longer than 4 weeks. So, again, guys, those of you who bought coffee and memberships and all of those things, thank you. We've made it through, and I've personally made it through without adding back to the debt I've been paying off, and that's kind of a win for me because I had some really bad habits, built 8 years ago that I have been recovering from for 8 years. It's been 8 years. Anyway, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show, the power and danger of silence. What got me thinking about this Oh, there are a couple things. One, I've thought about this a lot in the context of children who are abused by adults. The first thing the adult does is put the fear of God into the child about if they say anything, if they don't remain silent, what's gonna happen to them. And the tendency in our society for ugly things like that, to feel like we need to stay silent when we see something. And then I realized, silence, that's actually a way of controlling people. If you demand silence, if you demand secrecy, the demander is kind of controlling the other person. And I thought, well, but silence is a good thing too. Like sometimes you may disagree with a friend on something. Not a big deal. They may like strawberries, you don't like strawberries. Strawberries are really important to them. They want strawberries at your party, and you don't say anything about how you don't like strawberries. And the reason you don't say anything about that is it doesn't really bloody matter if there are strawberries at the party or not, and there's no reason to cause tension in your relationship over something like that, right? That is a powerful use of silence. It's a good use of silence. And so then I started thinking, well, what are the multiple kinds of silence and how do they get used? Well, and I thought, you know, silence as a public speaker. And here's the first one. As a public speaker, silence is a tool. As a teacher, silence is a tool. It's a tool you use when you're leading a group down a path to emphasize a point. It's also a way to give people enough time to process that they're able to come up with a solution to a problem that you may have known the answer to, but when you're teaching somebody and they tell you the answer to the problem that they need to learn how to solve, that is like level 10 success because you know they got it. When they answer back to you with the answer, and all you had to do was wait for a minute, that's way better than if you just read your notes and told them the answer to the question at hand. So, silence is a powerful oratory skill and it's a great teaching tool. In fact, when I was raising money on the phone for a nonprofit, I learned something about silence. I learned a couple things. First, when you're raising money, you ask questions. That's what you do. And then you wait for the answer. And sometimes you'll have a 2-minute long silence while the person thinks. It's like a game of silence chicken at that point. You just let them think, and eventually they'll talk. And when they start talking, usually what you're hearing is A, why they want to donate, or B, what stands in the way of the donation. Both of those answers are super helpful. If what stands in the way of the donation is something you can take care of, you now have a pathway to closing a donation. This is the same for sales, by the way. If what they answer makes it clear that they're going to donate, that's awesome. And if what they answer makes it clear that you're actually not a very good fit for them, well, then you move your little donation seeking butt onto something else and connect them with something they are interested in if you can, right? So silence in a conversation is a powerful tool and it's an indication that you are talking with your ears instead of your mouth. Talking with your ears instead of your mouth, it's a very important skill to learn because when you talk with your ears, you're listening with the intention of understanding rather than planning your next response in an exchange. And when you do that, you have a much deeper level of communication with people. You become a much better teacher and you become a much better learner. It's kind of an interesting thing. So, that type of silence is good. That's a great kind of silence. Well, then there's this other kind of silence silence as a tool of manipulation. In the example I gave before about using it to get somebody to leave somebody time to come to the conclusion and give you an answer, it's a tool of manipulation too, isn't it? But there's another kind of manipulation. And that is the kind of manipulation where you demand silence because whatever is happening is bad and you don't want that story told. Court orders demand that people be silent about things that they shouldn't have to be silent about, right? In a child abuse situation, it is shameful to talk about what happened. People manipulate kids into thinking it's their fault, and so then if they speak up, they're in trouble or they should be embarrassed. Silence is a tool of manipulation, and it is that use of silence that seems to be quite prevalent in our relatively nonviolent society and to be the most harmful. Staying silent because you know you're gonna get your butt beat if you don't, or because it's shameful whatever you did that you didn't have control over. Silence as a tool of manipulation is bad. Well, what's the difference between that and what I do in a sales call? It's intention. It's intention. Okay, third kind of silence, a moment of silence. You ever been at an event with a whole bunch of people and somebody has passed away and we give them a moment of silence and they go 1 or 2 whole minutes and you're in a room with I've been in an auditorium full of people, like thousands of people. I guess that's a stadium. I said auditorium, I was thinking of a stadium where we gave a moment of silence. And the whole stadium was quiet except for coughing and wiggling, right? Things dropping on the ground. And it was 60 seconds. And it was 60 of the longest seconds I had ever experienced in my life. You know, giving a moment of silence out of respect for somebody, I think is a good thing. And I think it can serve as a reminder about how much a little thing can make a big difference because 1 minute of your life isn't that big of a deal. But a moment of silence feels like a year, right? And when you give that level of respect, it gives you a moment to reflect and to remember how important the little things are. Because I think we forget that in our day to day life pretty easily. Okay, the next type of silence. This is the silence you use to get your head right. This is the silence I experience on a walk with my dogs, right? Sometimes, and I think a lot of people, having been shut at home with their families, realize that they never get a moment of silence and that they used to get that moment of silence by themselves in their car going places, right? Or at home when the kids were somewhere. Silence to get your head right is super important. And it doesn't have to be completely silent, right? You can have rain going in the background, which we do here right now, or the sounds of the ducks going "Wah, wah, 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 wah," like they do around the farm, or you can have sirens in the distance, right, out your window like you get in the I swear every time I go to New York, all I hear is sirens. Um, Silence to get your head right means you're shut off from all of the communication and the constant blah that's going on, and people constantly asking you if the dishes in the dishwasher are clean or dirty or any of those other things. And that is something, that kind of silence. If you don't build it into your life and get it, you can start going crazy. I think this is why the first 2 years of motherhood are really hard. Like, I haven't had kids, but I watch mothers their first 2 years with their first baby, and then sometimes they add a second baby, and then they get, like, 4 years of this, where it's just there's constant something going on with baby all the time, and they start going a little batty because they don't feel, like, empowered. They don't empower themselves to take that time, and depending on what kind of partner they have or what situation they're in, they may or may not ever get that silence. And usually those same women, when they've had 3 or 4 or 5 children, they figure out how to build in that silence anyway because they realize that you need to have silence to get your head right. If you don't make room to be in your own head, well, the first time you make room, if you haven't been in your own head for like 10 or 20 years, guys, it's a scary place. your head is a scary place. But if you make time to go there, you learn it's not really scary. It's just that you're forced to deal with some things you may not have thought you needed to deal with when you allow silence in. So silence to get your head right is really good, and it's super important to prioritize that. However you do it, whether it's, on a run with your headset in, listening to some sort of classical piece of music, or whether it's on a drive, whether you go for a walk, whether you just say, "Hey guys, I'm going to my bedroom, and for the next hour, nobody's allowed to speak with me unless they actually need to be driven to the emergency room." That silence is really important. I have a friend who does it. She gets up before her kids every morning and writes in the journal, so she has her moment of silence no matter what happens for the rest of the day. I know it can be hard, but it is worth it. That's why I have thoughts of the walks, guys. I finally get that moment in my head away from the noise. Something else about silence. Have you ever been talking on your phone, like on speakerphone or something, and then you walk into a grocery store and the ambient noise in the grocery store is so loud you can't hear your phone anymore? We live in a loud, loud world. And I didn't even realize how loud it is all the time. There's constantly something going over a loudspeaker. There's like grrr, there's just this like hissy noise going on all the time of HVAC units and compressors and fridges and people shuffling around, and it's just cars going by. It's loud. I moved to the country and there's not much noise here except for natural noises, and now when I go to the city, I have to yell to get over the noise that's just ambient noise. Think about that and find ways to build silence in where you don't get exposed to ambient noise if you can. That's actually why I started blasting classical music over headphones, was because 'cause I'd be on the road and I'd be in a city and I wasn't used to being in the city anymore, and then all of that noise would start getting to me even though there wasn't any sense to it at all. And then I'd blast some Mozart or some Beethoven or some Chopin, and I would hone in on that beauty and not hear the chaos. It was just kind of an interesting thing. Okay, another kind of silence. Silence is a means to keep peace. Sometimes holding your tongue is the best way to keep peace. And I think it's important to do this because once you say something, it can't be unsaid. If you have something hurtful to say, be ready to stand behind that for the rest of your life. And I know we get mad and we say things and we should forgive each other. But what if when we got mad, we didn't say something? We just said, I'm really mad right now and I need a little time. And we thought about what we were going to say about our anger before we said it. That right there keeps the peace, even if you end up having a really tense conversation later. Or in my example of the strawberries at the party, sometimes it just doesn't matter that you don't like strawberries. You're just being difficult at that point if you mention you don't like them, because at a party, there's lots of different foods to eat usually, and strawberries aren't the only thing, and who cares if you like them or don't? If your friend likes them and they're doing the party with you, let them have their strawberries, right? Sometimes it's not worth picking a fight over, and it keeps the peace, and that's a good thing. But this is kind of like my first example of the silence in the sales call and silence like a tool of manipulation. There's a dark side. And this is the last kind of silence that I thought of. Silence to go along to get along. This silence is the silence I studied my last year of college when I was looking at how it was even possible in such a relatively free nation as Germany that Nazis could take over and exterminate a bunch of Jews and other dissidents from their perspective. It kind of boiled down to silence to go along to get along. It was easier to submit to social pressure and not ask the hard questions that would give you the answers that would make you need to take an action. So you just didn't say anything, didn't ask anything. And then things got weird. And pretty soon there were some really real physical consequences of not, of speaking up. And a whole country that expanded into multiple countries was kept under the thumb of a terrible, uh, terrible set of leaders. Hate to use the word leaders, but you know what I mean. That's silence to go along to get along. And what I learned when I was looking at creative things being written at the time and propaganda films and cultural changes and the people who did stand up, what was unique about them, right? What I learned during that time is there was a concerted effort to control the narrative and to silence anybody who did not adhere to the narrative. And the people who made the biggest difference were the ones who didn't give a fig about that. And there are some of you listening to this who are that kind of person and who did not allow themselves to be silenced and who did not go along to get along. And what I learned is that none of us know what kind of person will be in a situation like that. Although some of us may have learned recently what kind of person will be in a situation like that. Silence to go along to get along. Anytime you ask a question that's critical or reasonable and you are attacked by the masses and they go after, they go after your moral standing, they smear your name, they simply say, well, your data is not 100% correct, so everything you say is wrong. And they insist on you changing to what is the prevailing narrative when all you did was ask a question. That's when you should ask the question again in a different way. That's when you should keep asking that question until you get an answer that makes sense to you. And what we're seeing right now on the topics of global warming, vaccinations, the COVID virus, right? What we're seeing when people just ask a simple question that does not match the narrative or can be construed to maybe not match the narrative when really you haven't made up your mind. You're just asking a bloody question. Is people coming out of the woodworks aggressively demanding your silence? We live in a world where some of our younger people think that the Bill of Rights is an outdated idea and that freedom of speech can go first. That we should not be allowed to say things that other people don't like. That we should not be able to question the prevailing narrative with a question that is reasonable, and we should be forced to remain silent. And they try to silence us. I'm not saying the kids are the ones trying to silence us on COVID, guys. They, the people who think it's okay to force silence, to demand that people have the same opinion, that everybody has to have the same opinion, that it's not okay to question prevailing thought. Once upon a time, they thought the earth was flat. That was the prevailing wisdom, and people were thrown in dungeons for even to daring to say that the world might be round by denying the critical question. They show themselves to not be willing or open-minded to see things from a different perspective and maybe find out that they were wrong. And I know it's uncomfortable being wrong. But when we silence the dissent, even if I personally don't agree with whatever the dissent is, we lose the most important part of our culture and the most important thing that can keep us from going back to some of our baser instincts and just throwing people in concentration camps and killing them. Because we have that. We all have that in us. It's a hard thing about being a human. As much as I'd like to think that I'm a peaceful person and I wouldn't hurt anybody, I've never really been tested. Most of us have never really been tested, and we don't really know. but it's built into us somewhere along the way. We've been a very, very violent animal for centuries, for thousands of centuries, right? It's, uh, it's built in. It's something that I feel like we should not empower in ourselves, but I think we empower it when we use social pressure to silence reasonable questions, even unreasonable ones. If somebody asks an unreasonable question, why not refute it with facts, right? Heck, the word reasonable doesn't even fit here. If somebody wants to have a discussion with me about the earth being flat, well, by all means, we'll have it for a minute until I'm bored, and then I'm going to move on because I am convinced that the earth is round ish, right? Mostly. It's kind of a funny shape, actually, but you know what I mean. And it does us all good to look at the other perspective if we have one already on a topic. Vaccinations, global warming. It does us good to look at what are they actually bringing up? Because in there somewhere, even if they're not right, or is some grain of truth. Or you're gonna find out you're wrong, and then that's a whole uncomfortable thing in itself, right? But by insisting on people being silenced or by allowing yourself to be silenced, we never have this discussion. Silence is a tool. It's something that we need to have to be healthy mentally. And cultural silence that occurs when people see a trend that may not be healthy and ask a polite question, that kind of silence is dangerous and we can't allow it. That's the result of peer pressure. So look around you and ask yourself, am I going along to get along right now? And is that the best course of action? If you like the show and want to support the work I do, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at Hollow Roast. That's hollowroast.com. Two, become a member. The membership options are all over at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week. Sometimes I'm talking and I'm on a roll, and then I see comments on the live string on the video, and I want to read. I know if I read them, I'm going to get off my roll. And I didn't know what I was going to say next if I did that. So anyway, now I'm reading your comments. Misbehaving in the proper manner. Yes. Science behaving as a religion is terrible. Kids of the Gamergate era have their eyes open. Bless them. I'm glad. I do remember Gamergate. I used that as an example once because it was like a non-combative example, and I didn't have to bring up global warming because it seems like global warming always comes up when I think about this issue. And then Amy's saying, I can't believe the people who get angry at me when I ask questions, even if the questions have nothing to do with that particular person. Yeah. Yeah, I had somebody go for the jugular on me the other day when I just posted what percentage of Tennessee's population had died as a result of because of somebody they cared about who writes country music had died. And they went just ballistic and got aggressive. And I was like, wow, you're also a dick. Good to know. But I just argument because there was no reason to have it. I just talked about the statistics some more with some other people who were willing to have a discussion rather than hurl insults. Yeah. Don't meet snark with snark as good as it feels. Sometimes it's fun to do that though. So we're all guilty of that. No, it was not you, Josh. Josh always hopes it wasn't him. I promise quietly about it and not talk about passive cast. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining into the live chat. Your comments were great. And I will be getting the podcast out, which you've now already heard, so you don't have to download it. So now my download numbers are going to go down because I stream on YouTube right now. Actually, they're going up. It's kind of nice. Should have done this years ago. Anyway, after this, guess what I get to do? I did all my work today, and then I got the podcast done, and now I get to go play with plants and or figure out where those 4 boxes of things go in my kitchen. It's now pouring down rain. I was going to go in the garden and put some more plants out. I think I'll probably end up putting those 4 boxes away, but that's good too because it'll make me feel happier in my house. Anyway, talk to you later.